Tonight we're diving into the one question America can't stop asking. What's inside the Epstein files and why would a sitting U.S. president fight so hard to keep them buried? These documents have the power to shift elections, expose power networks, and rewrite the legacy of the most controversial leader of our time. If you want unfiltered truth, not sanitized headlines, hit subscribe right now because this channel doesn't protect anyone's feelings or anyone's legacy. America is tense right now because the fight over the Epstein files has turned into something far bigger than a scandal. People are arguing about national trust, political power, and the right to know the truth. This story is not celebrity gossip. It is a test of how far a sitting president can go when the public demands answers that could shake the foundations of his own legacy. President Trump is in the middle of that storm. The pressure around him keeps building because these files carry the kind of weight that can damage political careers, expose hidden networks, and change the way citizens see their leaders. The country senses that something important is buried inside those documents, and everyone is watching to see how the president will handle it. The phrase Epstein files sounds simple, but it covers a massive collection of material. There are flight logs from private planes that carried some of the most powerful people in the world. There are victim statements that describe who was present, who helped, and who looked the other way. There are sealed court documents that judges kept out of public view for years. There are Department of Justice memos that detail internal debates around prosecution. There are references from federal intelligence agencies that hint at surveillance, informants, and warnings that may have been ignored. Together they form a map of connections that reach into politics, business, media, and global finance. It is the kind of archive that can embarrass governments and ruin reputations. People understand why this is sensitive, but the pressure for transparency keeps growing. Citizens want to know why the files were sealed for so long and why they are still being held back. The president has the power to release them, but he also has the power to slow things down. That is where the real tension sits. Every time the government delays something, people assume there is a reason. Every time someone in power says the files are complicated or incomplete, people assume that someone important might be hiding behind the paperwork. The public sees a simple choice. Either the country gets the truth, or someone is protecting the kind of names that cannot survive daylight. The danger is not in Epstein himself. He is long gone. The danger is in the possibility that influential people who moved through his world could be exposed in those files. That is why this fight matters. It is not only about what happened in the past. It is about what will happen to the future of a president, a government, and the trust that Americans place in both. President Trump did not start at the center of this fight. In the beginning, he treated the Epstein files like a simple promise. He said the public deserved answers and that the truth should come out. It was direct and confident, and many people believed him. For a while, it seemed like he would follow through because the idea of full transparency fit the image he wanted to project. He said he had nothing to hide, and he acted like the release of the files would clear the air for everyone. Things shifted when the pressure around the documents grew. The promise of a full release slowly turned into talk about a partial release. The administration began saying the files were sensitive, complicated, and tied to national security concerns. People noticed the change in tone. It was subtle at first, but later it became clear that the government was slowing things down. They started talking about privacy issues and legal reviews, and that raised eyebrows. When the message went from openness to caution, the public felt the temperature rise. Congress picked up on the hesitation and began to demand updates. Lawmakers from both parties asked why the files were not released on schedule. They wanted to know what the delays meant, so they pushed for hearings and reports. Public polls added even more pressure. Most Americans said they believed someone was holding back information. Media coverage became intense because reporters sensed that the government was wrestling with something bigger than paperwork. Each delay fed the idea that powerful people were caught inside those pages. Opponents saw an opportunity. They said the president was using his office to block documents that could hurt him politically. They argued that he was protecting allies or shielding himself from embarrassment. They pointed to his shifting statements as proof that something changed behind closed doors. Whether those claims were fair or not, they spread fast because people expect the worst when a leader backs away from a promise. Every careful answer from the administration made the situation look more suspicious. In politics, hesitation is often viewed as guilt, and that feeling grew louder. The truth is simple. When a president slows the release of documents that the country wants to see, people start filling in the blanks on their own. The moment you refuse to open a door, the world begins to imagine what you are hiding behind it. They assume you are protecting someone important, and sometimes they assume you are protecting yourself. Before we go deeper, if you want the truth without filters, hit that subscribe button. You will need it for what comes next. The Epstein files sound like a single stack of papers, but they are actually a huge collection of records that were gathered across many years. The first major group comes from court records that were previously sealed in the Southern District of New York. Judges kept many of these documents out of public view because they involved sensitive testimony, private information, and names that carried political weight. These files include motions, hearings, and internal notes that describe how prosecutors handled the case. They show what evidence was considered strong and what was viewed as too risky to expose during earlier investigations. People have waited for these records because they hold a clear timeline of decisions that shaped the entire case. Another important section includes deposition transcripts. These are sworn statements from individuals who were questioned under oath. Some of the names inside these transcripts are well known. They include celebrities, business leaders, political figures, and individuals who worked around Epstein. These statements matter because they show who interacted with him, who visited certain locations, and who denied knowing him at all. Depositions often reveal small details that contradict public claims. When someone says one thing in an interview but says something very different under oath, it creates serious problems, especially when that person is connected to national politics. The flight logs and visitor lists form another powerful part of the Epstein files. These documents track who traveled on his private planes and who visited his New York townhouse or his island in the Caribbean. People pay close attention to these records because they provide hard evidence of movement and proximity. A name in a flight log is not proof of wrongdoing, but it does confirm that someone was physically there. When those names appear beside other high-profile individuals, the public starts to question what those relationships looked like. These logs can place people in specific places at specific times, which becomes important when comparing them to public statements from those same individuals. The files also contain digital evidence that was seized from Epstein over the years. This includes hard drives, emails, contact lists, and internal messages spanning from 2005 to 2019. Federal agents pulled this data during raids and investigations. Inside the drives are conversations about money, property, travel, and personal arrangements. These records show patterns in how Epstein ran his network and who communicated with him. They also contain references to people who may not appear in the court documents. Digital evidence has the ability to expose private conversations that never were meant to surface. So many powerful individuals worry about what could be inside these archives. Another section includes financial transactions. These documents track wire transfers, offshore accounts, and payments that moved between Epstein and others. Money trails often reveal connections that are stronger than personal friendships. When investigators follow the money, they can identify who benefited from Epstein, who supported him, and who may have shared financial interests with him. Some of these payments have already raised questions because they link wealthy individuals and public figures to accounts that seem hidden or unusual. Federal notes make up another large part of the collection. There are FBI summaries, internal memos, and 302 interview reports that describe conversations with victims, witnesses, and individuals who were involved in the case. These notes show what investigators asked, what responses they received, and where they believed the evidence pointed. Victim statements inside these files are especially significant. They describe the people who were present in Epstein's world and the roles they played. These statements often list names without holding back, which is why many politicians worry about their release. All of these categories become explosive when they are viewed together. Alone, each piece can seem easy to explain, but once you combine travel logs with emails, court statements, and financial records, the timeline begins to tighten. Patterns start to appear. Some names show up in places they claim they never visited. Some emails contradict earlier public claims. Some transactions raise questions about motives. The danger is not always in a single detail. The danger comes when the details reinforce each other and paint a picture that cannot be explained away. The Epstein files hold power because they expose connections that many people would prefer to keep invisible. They reveal who moved through his social circle and who stayed close to him during the years when his activities should have been obvious. These contradictions are what make the files so politically dangerous. They do not just tell a story about Epstein. They tell a story about everyone who crossed paths with him and everyone who knew more than they admitted. That is why the country keeps waiting for the full release, and that is why the fight over these records continues to grow. The material that could sit at the center of the political storm is not loud or dramatic on its own. It is the quiet details that matter. The first group involves inconsistencies between President Trump's public claims and the documented interactions linked to the Epstein orbit. Trump has often described the connection as distant. He has said he barely knew Epstein. The records that exist paint a more complicated picture. They include entries that place both men at the same social events in the early 2000s. Some listings include overlapping guests, which raises questions about how separate those circles really were. None of this proves criminal involvement, but it creates tension between what he has said and what is recorded. There are also discrepancies inside the travel and event logs tied to Epstein. Certain logs list dates that clash with Trump's public timeline. Supporters argue these conflicts could be clerical errors. Critics argue they signal something deeper. The truth is that both sides have reasons to push their version, and that is why the documents matter. The moment timelines fail to line up, people start to fill the gaps with their own assumptions. For a sitting president, even the hint of inconsistency becomes a political problem because the public expects the story to stay straight. Another category involves internal communications that might show awareness of Epstein's behavior inside elite social circles long before the public knew anything. These are not smoking gun messages. They are fragments, notes, emails with vague references to people, parties, or meetings that sound normal until they sit next to statements from victims. When those two sets of information are compared, it becomes harder to dismiss the idea that many people knew something was off, even if they did not understand the full scale. There is also the financial side. Epstein moved money through offshore paths, shell companies, and private accounts that intersected with donors, business partners, and officials across different political groups. If any of those names appear near Trump's network, even in a harmless way, it becomes fuel for critics. Financial records have a way of shaping narratives because numbers look objective, even when they only show part of the story. A single wire transfer, a shared intermediary, or an old business introduction can turn into a headline. That is why these documents worry people in power. Context is hard to protect once the public forms an opinion. Testimony collected from early 2000 social circles also carries risk. Some statements refer to Trump by name, not as an accusation, but as part of the social landscape around Epstein. These mentions alone are not damaging in a legal sense. The problem is political. Voters react to association far faster than they react to evidence. Opponents know this. Prosecutors know it too. When early summaries show that someone in a powerful position was present in the same rooms as a man like Epstein, the pressure to explain every detail becomes intense. Prosecutors at the time handled these names with caution. They looked at credibility, timelines, and relevance. Many mentions never led to action because they lacked clear connection to criminal conduct. But politics does not run on legal standards. It runs on perception. A name in a document is enough to spark weeks of debate. A contradiction in a timeline is enough to raise doubts about honesty. A single email that hints at awareness can become a storm. The blunt truth is simple. A president cannot afford weak links. Even unrelated details can cause political collapse when people believe there is a pattern. The danger is not in the most explosive claims. It is in the small pieces that, when placed together, make the public feel that something is being held back. That feeling alone can shift the course of an election or redefine a presidency. It does not matter if those claims are accurate. What matters is that the line is easy to repeat and hard to erase. Late-night hosts will amplify the story because they know the audience reacts to anything that mixes politics with scandal. They will take small fragments from the documents and turn them into punchlines. Even a passing reference to Trump's name in a deposition or a party guest list can become a week of jokes. Those jokes shape how the public feels because humor spreads faster than nuance. News outlets will do the same thing on a larger scale. They will highlight every record that suggests overlap between Trump and Epstein's world. Even if the connection is weak, it will look serious once it appears on a headline. Social platforms will spread these clips within minutes. Users will share screenshots of isolated lines without context. Most people will see the snippet, not the full story. That is why these documents carry political danger even before anyone reads them. Congressional committees will not stay quiet. Members will push for subpoenas and public hearings because hearings create moments that grab national attention. A single hearing can lead to weeks of speculation. Lawmakers know that the act of investigating can be more damaging than the findings. They will argue that the public deserves the full truth, and they will frame any hesitation from the White House as evidence that something is wrong. This all works because perception rules American politics. Voters rarely wait for final proof. They react to patterns, tone, and early impressions. When a name like Trump appears next to a name like Epstein, people jump to conclusions based on fear and instinct. Even unverified links can drag approval ratings down because the public sees connection as guilt. The opponents understand that. They know they do not need a direct accusation. They just need enough noise to make the president look like he is hiding something. Once that idea takes hold, it becomes very hard to reverse, no matter what the documents actually show. The danger to Trump is not just political. It is historical. Past scandals like Watergate or the Clinton controversies caused temporary waves, but they were mostly about political maneuvering or personal indiscretions among adults. The Epstein files are different because they involve moral questions, minors, and a serious imbalance of power. That makes the situation far more damaging. People do not just see mistakes. They see a pattern of protecting the vulnerable from justice, or at least appearing to do so. That perception sticks in a way that political strategy alone cannot erase. Reputational damage in cases like this does not come from crimes alone. It comes from cover-ups, from secrecy, from hesitation and denial. A president who is perceived as blocking documents or slowing disclosure appears less accountable. That image stays with the public far longer than any legal outcome. History remembers what people felt was hidden, not always what was proven. The act of holding back information becomes a headline that never fades, and it becomes a key part of the legacy. Future historians will not focus on ideology when they look back. They will focus on secrecy and transparency. They will write about the decisions made when power met public scrutiny. They will judge leaders by what they tried to hide as much as by what they accomplished. In that sense, the Epstein files are a historical trap. They offer a snapshot of a moment when public trust clashed with private knowledge, and the choices made now will define how history remembers a presidency. This goes beyond immediate politics. Trust in institutions is at stake. When the president is linked to files suggesting concealment, people question the integrity of the system itself. They ask if courts, prosecutors, and investigators are being influenced or ignored. Presidential power becomes a double-edged sword. The same authority that allows decisions to be made also magnifies any perceived abuse. That magnification turns small gaps into monumental failures in public perception. The brutal truth is clear. Once a name appears in these files, the stain does not wash away. Even if there is no wrongdoing, even if the connections are minor or accidental, the association is permanent. It becomes part of the narrative that the public remembers. A legacy is not only what a president does in office. It is also what the public believes about their character, and in this case the belief may never fully recover. If the Epstein files are fully released, the impact could be immediate and intense. Politically, it could create a meltdown that affects every corner of the administration. Opponents would use every piece of information to challenge the president's credibility. Every mention of a name or connection would become a headline, and the public would judge based on perception more than facts. The momentum of the story could shift approval ratings in a matter of days. Legal inquiries would almost certainly follow. Congressional committees could demand hearings and subpoenas. States could open their own investigations if federal documents suggest wrongdoing. Even if the files do not contain direct evidence of criminal behavior, the mere appearance of connections or withheld information would trigger formal reviews. Lawyers and investigators would analyze every detail to determine whether any law was bent or broken. Leaks are almost inevitable once the files are public. Journalists and insiders could release fragments to social media and news outlets around the world. Each leak would spark new rounds of speculation and commentary. International audiences would follow closely, and global media would frame the story in ways that could pressure both the president and American institutions. Diplomatic consequences could also emerge. Allies and rivals alike would notice the connections and inconsistencies. Questions about trust and transparency could affect negotiations, trade, and international perception of the United States. Even routine diplomatic discussions could be clouded by the attention the files receive. The White House public relations team would face chaos. Every statement, every explanation, and every denial would be scrutinized. The president's messaging would have to be immediate, precise, and consistent to avoid fueling further criticism. Small missteps would be amplified because the public and the media would be watching for contradictions. The release of these files would not just be a domestic story. It would dominate news cycles globally and test the limits of political control in a presidency. If the Epstein files are not released, the consequences could be just as serious but in a different way. Public distrust would skyrocket because people would assume the government is hiding something. Every delay, every explanation, and every promise of review would be met with skepticism. Citizens would begin to question not just the president, but the institutions around him. Trust that took years to build could erode in a matter of weeks. Media pressure would intensify. Reporters would dig harder, investigate deeper, and frame stories to highlight the gaps in transparency. Every small leak, every offhand comment, and every delayed document would become a headline. The scrutiny would be relentless, and the story would dominate news cycles both nationally and internationally. Opponents would not wait for facts. They would craft their own narrative, claiming that the president is protecting powerful allies or covering up serious wrongdoing. Even if the claims are unverified, repetition makes perception reality in politics. Conspiracy theories would quickly fill the vacuum left by withheld information. Social media would amplify every rumor and speculation, making it impossible for the administration to control the story. If the files remain sealed, Trump's legacy risks being defined by secrecy. He could be remembered not for accomplishments, but as the president who hid the truth. That perception alone could shape history and public memory for generations. If the Epstein files are not released, the consequences could be severe and long-lasting. Public distrust would skyrocket because people would assume something important is being hidden. Every delay or vague explanation would make the public question the president and the institutions around him. Trust that took years to build could vanish almost overnight. Media pressure would increase tenfold. Reporters would investigate every angle, highlight gaps in transparency, and turn small details into major stories. Every leak, every conflicting statement, and every delayed document would become a headline. The story would dominate news cycles and social media discussions for weeks, and the administration would struggle to control the narrative. Opponents would seize the opportunity to create their own version of events. They would claim that the president is protecting powerful allies or covering up wrongdoing. Even if their claims are not fully verified, repeated coverage would shape public perception. Conspiracy theories would quickly fill the vacuum, spreading online and creating confusion about what is true and what is speculation. If the files remain sealed, Trump's legacy could be defined by secrecy. He risks being remembered not for policy or accomplishments, but as the president who hid the truth. That perception alone could shape history and the way future generations view his time in office. The final verdict is simple. Even if the Epstein files contain nothing truly explosive, the act of suppressing them is explosive on its own. Holding back information creates suspicion, and suspicion spreads faster than facts. History does not judge what might be true or what could have happened. It judges secrecy, the choice to hide the truth, and the impression that power was used to protect someone or something. Legacy is shaped by perception more than reality. The public sees patterns and fills in gaps, and right now the perception around these files is brutal. Whatever is inside may never matter as much as the impression that things were hidden. That alone could define a presidency, shape how history remembers it, and mark an era by what was kept from the people rather than what was achieved in office.